5 to 9 seats that I think were possibly changed as a result of foreign interference. Narrower margin seats where we had large numbers of people not voting and suspicions about voter suppression. Folks within the government knew that there was a level of foreign interference occurring, and I think we owe it to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Canadians that it was targeted at. We owed it to them to warn them.
Former Tory leader Aaron O'Toole testifying before the foreign interference inquiry today, saying his party estimates foreign election meddling cost it between 5 and 9 seats in the last election. Here's how the Prime Minister is responding.
I can understand where someone who lost an election is trying to look for reasons other than themselves why they might have lost an election. The outcome of those elections were decided by Canadians, not by anybody else. Unfortunately, the Conservatives continue to try and play partisan games with the facts and the issues before us that are very, very seriously.
So just to be totally fair, O'Toole didn't say that Tories lost the overall election because of meddling, just a series of seats. He's also sounding an alarm about information tabled to the inquiry about the Chinese regime's efforts to meddle, he says was never shared with him or his party. Is the inquiry picking up some political steam? Let's bring the front bench back. Saïd Selvem, Gary Marr, Carl Bélanger, and Najoud Al-Malez. Saïd, I'll start with you and get your take on the kind of shade that the Prime Minister threw Aaron O'Toole in that initial comment there.
It was some serious shade, and to be honest, I think that both of them do have a point. I mean, the Prime Minister wants to put this in the rear view, and he threw his shade, and as a result of that, he's like, let's move on. But the loss of an election is due to the leader, not necessarily due to foreign interference. Mr. O'Toole is specifically saying, look, I may have lost 9 seats in that election due to foreign interference, and this is something that Canadians should be concerned about, even if there is no direct causality between foreign interference and losing some seats. Even if there's a smidgen of it, it should be of concern, not just to security agencies, but to all Canadians. It's a cornerstone of our democracy to have free and fair elections that are not influenced by any foreign entities. So they both have a point. Is this going to matter politically in the short run for the Prime Minister? I don't think so, but I think Mr. O'Toole raises some valid concerns.
What's your sense of that, Najoud? I mean, there were 6 months of last year. This time last year, we were talking about this every day. It was dominating the news cycle. The Liberals were often on the defense, but they actually didn't see their polling numbers start to track down in a serious way until the main issue became cost of living. Yeah. Do you anticipate, I mean, and we have learned some interesting stuff through this inquiry so far, some salient stuff. Do you think it will have a political impact?
I think it's interesting for those who are following it from last year, aka Ottawa people. I think the reporting from last year made a much larger splash than right now the inquiry is making, and even that didn't move the dial last year, really. The reality is it's not a bread and butter issue. I think this is maybe a constructive conversation, ahead of the next election, and as the inquiry goes on, it talks about, how to improve things. But at the end of the day, this is not what Pierre Poilievre is out campaigning about, and I don't think it's going to be an issue for the Liberals either.
Gary, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say this, that, I mean, it was a big issue when we were talking about it last year. It's not as big an issue for the voting public today. But I disagree with the Prime Minister when he says that this is not a part of, he characterizes Mr. O'Toole's points as being partisan. This is something that should be of concern to all parties. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Conservative or a Liberal or a Green. And I agree with a lot of what Saïd said about this is something that even if it didn't affect the outcome of the election, every Canadian should be able to trust, how their votes are cast and how they're counted and how they're influenced. And I think this is pertinent because of Bill C-65, which was tabled by Minister LeBlanc a couple of weeks ago, when, the objective of the legislation is to make it easier to vote. That's a good idea. I like that idea, but it has to be tempered with the ability to ensure that those who vote correctly and that you those portions of the bill that talk about protection of the integrity of the election process, I think are really critically important. And so making sure it's easier to vote is good, but it's also got to protect the process so that we can have trust in election outcomes, whether on a riding level or on a national level.
I think like the clip today from the Prime Minister, maybe Carl, is a bit of an anomaly, because I actually feel like this is one of the rare political debates that has had some nuance. Like even the Conservatives, when talking about the ridings, and in particular Erin O'Toole, have been pretty clear, unequivocal each time. We don't think it impacted the outcome of the election, but this other stuff matters. Is it in your view, is it sour grapes or is it legitimate, and should it be part of the discussion around all this?
I thought the Prime Minister was pretty flippant, to be honest with you, in his remarks today, and it just underscores the fact that the only reason this inquiry has been put in place was to release political pressure. The Liberal government was feeling the heat back then. There was a narrative that was starting to take hold that they had something to hide. And the reality is that the Prime Minister has no interest in the inquiry, in getting to the bottom of any of this, because in his mind, there was no impact. There was no significant impact. And if there was interference, it didn't change anything. Well, it might have changed something, and certainly altered the course of some individuals' political career. But that's part of the problem for Erin O'Toole today, is like he made it about himself. Right? And he made remarks about, oh, I could have stayed on as leader and things like that. That's irrelevant. But the reality is that it's not going to take hold in people's mind as a real political issue because of this inquiry, which is being used as cover by the Prime Minister and his government.
Well, we'll see. They're going to testify, I think, starting Monday. We'll hear directly from the Prime Minister. So TBD. I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate our discussion tonight. Our front bench, Saeed Selvam, Gary Marr, Carl Bélanger, and Najoud Al-Malise. Our